Hi folks, so it's time for the long promised library tour. I feel like my shelves are sufficiently full now to make that worthwhile, so I'm going to give you a bit of a whistle stop tour. I'm not going to linger too long as we've been here for hours and I don't want to split it into two, but I'm going to share with you my slightly iffy higgledy-piggledy book filing system, which is equal parts ordered and chaotic, as you'll see. So let's do this. No point dilly-dallying, I'll give you the guided tour and I'll see you at the end. Okay, let me give you a sense of the glory that is my new shelving. So I put this in, well, probably a month ago, maybe a bit more now. So these are just 5 approximately 7-foot lengths of plywood that I've attached to the wall with some brackets, and they're just high enough to hold typical A format mass market paperback. So I haven't actually counted how many there are on there, a few hundred certainly, and it had the effect of making a bit of room on my other shelves, which we'll come to in a minute. So these are all sorted alphabetically-ish. I haven't gone to the lengths of sorting the books within a given author into alphabetical order, although I may get taken by that idea at some point. So let me just take you on a quick tour of this lot. So we have Brian Aldiss first of all. Some of them are stacked horizontally just to stop the others toppling over. I did mean to put a piece of wood here to act as a bookend, but I haven't quite got around to that yet. So all this first. Nothing especially remarkable there, I don't think. And then we've got some Douglas Adams in various forms. This sort of classic Hitchhiker's Guide, and the others that go with that, Restaurant at the End of the Universe and so on. And then there's a whole chunk of Paul Anderson's, none of which I've read. None of which I've read. I will probably start with Tau Zero first, I think. But there's a whole bunch here, including some that he wrote with someone who I assume is his wife, Karen Anderson, sister maybe. And then it finishes with Boat of a Million Years, and then we go on to Piers Anthony. It's another author I've got a few things of but I've never read. Asimov I'm super familiar with. I read a lot when I was a kid, so there's a couple of different versions of Foundation series there. There's the 80s Granada and then the 70s Panther with the triptych images. I'm not going to spend too much time on these because I'm going to do a deep dive on Asimov at some point over the next month or two. And there's the sort of earlier of his work, the Space Rangers stories, which I haven't read, and then loads of short stories at the end, most of which I have read. So we go all the way to the end. Next shelf down, a bit more Asimov. Where are we? Yeah, a bit more Asimov. And then we get on to Ballard. Can't stand Ballard, but I am quite interested to read The Crystal World, and I would like to get The Drowned Earth as well, but I haven't got it. I don't have much Bester. It's just Starburst. I wouldn't mind getting The Demolished Man, although I do have it in a an omnibus. And there's the 4 Cities in Flight books there. The Arrow format paperbacks. I quite like those. And then we've got a bit of Bradbury, a couple of Lee Brackett's first, actually The Big Jump I'd like to read, it's meant to be good, and then a couple of her pulpy ones, and then some Bradbury, including Fahrenheit 51, obviously. And then we get into some bits and bobs, David Brin, Gregory Benford collaboration there, that's meant to be very good. Heart of the Comet, I'd quite like to read that. A few John Brunners, including the Dramaturgies of Jan, a few others. A few Burroughs, I don't have many of those. I suppose a collector in me wouldn't mind getting hold of all of the Mars books in the New English Library, they're quite nice. And there's a Venus set as well, which I wouldn't mind getting. And then we've got a few C.J. Cherry's, none of which I've read. But would like to. A few John Chalkers is another person I've never read anything by. Twilight of the Well of Souls and The Return of Nathan Brazil, I think, are in the same set. And then a whole bunch of Arthur C. Clarke's, most of which I've read over the years, but not all of them. Nothing especially noteworthy, I don't think. There's a Michael G. Coney there. Friends come in boxes. It's a curious concept. A couple of Coopers. And an ad from Davidson. Never read that. 2 or 3 Delaney's. Some Gordon R. Dixons. And then there's some Philip Jose Farmers, which I haven't read yet. And then we end up with, there's a couple of Alan Dean Fosters there and Stephen Golden as well, which again I haven't read. There's a couple of Robert L. Fords there. I think I've read Dragon's Egg in the past, but I haven't read the other one, which I initially thought was the sequel to Dragon's Egg simply because it involved the word dragon, but that isn't the case. So then we're down to the H's. So Harry Harrison. That's another author. I've not read any of his books. I think that if I read one, the next one that I read will be, there we go, Make Room, which is an overpopulation tale. Anyway, I'll put him back. Yeah, so plenty of Harrisons. And then there's a whole bunch of Heinleins. I've read 1 or 2 of his books, but not many. Starship Troopers was the most recent. So I need to tuck in some of those. Plenty of Heinlein. Various eras. And there's a few Herberts. What have we got here? Bits and pieces now. A few Fred Hoyles. Huxley. The Colossus books, I'd quite like to read those. Those came from the Mythical Dave from Tilehurst Library, if I remember rightly. Damon Knight, 1 or 2. I would like, for old time's sake, to read the Battlestar Galactica. That's a novelisation of an original movie, I believe. Tanith Lee's meant to be very good. Haven't read that. What else have we got over here? Lem, there's a few of his that I've got that I'd like to read. And then we start with the McCaffreys, of which there are many, many, many. And they continue on the other shelf. So, as I've said before, my quandary with McCaffrey books is do I like them enough to keep them, and they're occupying quite a bit of shelf space. I did enjoy the first one that I read, so the jury is out. So those are all the McCaffreys, mixture of different eras and formats there. And there's a few Michael Moorcocks. I haven't read any Moorcock, and it doesn't massively appeal. It just I think it's just slightly schlocky end of the spectrum for me. But then I need to reserve judgment because I haven't actually read anything I should do. Larry Niven. It's a bit more from my formative years, the 1980s. Some of them anyway. Moat in God's Eye. I haven't read that for a long time. I need to get that out at some point. There's a few. I quite like these Del Rey formats, which you occasionally find in the UK, despite them being American. I wonder if they were imported, but you find them more often than you might expect for a US edition. A bunch more Nivens, and then some Andre Nortons that I acquired quite recently. I don't know how easily I'm going to be able to get behind my filing cabinet here. Let's have a look. Yeah, Frederick Pohl's another author that I have a few books of and have never read. Somehow avoided him over the years. Joe Pornell. More Joe Pornell. That's the end of the shelf, and that I can't actually see what's going on there. Bob Shaw begins at the end of that shelf. And there's the rest of the S's here. So you've got Clifford Simak and my 80s Methuen collection beginning to expand. Then Silverberg. I've only read a couple of his, but I really like them. Just navigating around my monitor here. Where are we? Silverberg, more Silverbergs. We start getting into the Doc Smiths. That's the Family D'Alembert, I think it is, that weren't actually written by Doc Smith. They were written by Stephen Goldin from an outline by Doc Smith. And then there's the Lensman series, a couple of the couple of the Skylark books. I don't have them all. And then a couple of the standalones. And then Brian Stableford's, Bruce Sterling. And then we get right at the very end here, which is slightly obscured by my angle poised lamp, is Jack Vance, which is another author I'm ashamed to say I haven't read anything by, so I need to fix that quite soon. So that is all my extra shelves that I put on in the last few months. So I guess we can start to tackle the OG shelves. So I can do a quick spin just to give you a sense of. So those go all the way around the end of my office here. They're sort of 8 foot tall. They're just IKEA shelves, Billy shelves, and so on down to the ground. Okay, so we're just going to go from top to bottom, I guess. Well, actually, let me finish the vintage books first. So on this shelf we've got A. Van Vogt, carrying on with the V's. And those kind of go till we get to Vonnegut and White and Williamson, and then from this point on we're into anthologies, and for reasons which aren't completely clear to me, the alphabet for the vintage books continues on this shelf, which is the next case over. So we've got more Wilsons, and then the Gene Wolfes, and that ends in Zelazny. There are no Wyndhams because the Wyndhams have a shelf to themselves. I'll come to those later. So the sense of order kind of ends there, really. It's now chaos. So I'll start at the top of these shelves, and these are in no special order, and they're sort of, loosely speaking, more modern books, more contemporary books. So there's no kind of hard and fast boundary. I haven't really said, okay, anything by these people before this time goes on the other shelves. So it's a little bit fluid, let's say, or chaotic if you prefer. So on the top shelf, the microphone's going to move away from my mouth now, so it might get a bit faint, but the top shelf has a bit of Larry Niven hardback action, followed by Greg Bear, and then it's all Alistair Reynolds. I haven't quite got all of his in hardback, but a decent chunk of them. Okay, and the next one down, there's a few Tchaikovskys. The Children of Memory is missing because I'm reading that. It's on my TBR pile for this month. Then you've got the Hugh Howey books, and then bits and pieces. There's no logic to this other than what fits on a shelf. I don't like to break authors up or sets up. So it's surprising how quickly you get to know which books are on which shelf. Like I could have told you before looking at them exactly where the Jeff Vandermeer books were, for example, even though they're not in any particular order. I'm missing a couple of the Becky Chambers books. I'm missing the second one, which is annoying because I read the first one, and then I've got 3 and 4, I think it is. I'm missing 2. What's it called? Closed and Common Orbit, I think. The 2 kind of religion-y ones, Sparrow and Children of God. I hear mixed reports of those. I'm not in a rush to read them. And then the next shelf down is, so that's A. Van Vogt again, and then we're into the start of the anthologies, of which there are many. So they're a mixture of ages and eras. Those are mostly from the 60s and 70s, I think. And then, what have we got here? There's some more anthologies and anthologies. I think mostly anthologies with occasional collection in there, although the collection should go with the author, really. And there's a whole array of them there. So the new writings in SF start here. There's a video on the channel a while back where I got nearly all of these from 1 to 30 in one hit in a charity shop. It was great. Someone had dropped their entire collection. So start at 1. I'm missing 8, which should go here. That's missing. And I'm missing number 26 as well, but otherwise I've got them all. My favourite covers are the ones from the late 70s. They're just very colourful and quite pleasing to look at. I like those. And then we've got a few other sets here. Andromeda, I'm reading the first one, that's why it's not on the shelf. In fact, I've finished it now. And then there's Continuum, which I've talked about on the channel before. So those are some, but not all, of the anthologies. So hold that thought. And then we've got, slightly bizarrely, the books that are by authors that I consider to be vintage, and they're therefore on my vintage shelves. But let me sit down. But which wouldn't fit on the shelves. so these are a bit taller than A format. These are B format, and they just wouldn't fit on the shelves when I put them up. So these are in alphabetical order, they should be. So there's some authors here that you would have seen on the other shelves. So Brian Aldiss, for example, Douglas Adams, Piers Anthony, Ballard, Blish. In fact, I can get rid of that now because I've got separate copies of that. So that can go on my duplicate pile, leaving me a bit of space. Happy days. Yeah, so generally speaking, these are authors that exist on my other shelves, but these books won't fit. And so they live here. And then the next shelf is Peter Hamilton Land. So they're not quite all hardbacks. I don't have a hardback of the first of the Night's Dawn trilogy, Reality Dysfunction. That's really expensive to get hold of, talking hundreds of pounds. It wasn't his first book, it was one of his first book, which was popular. And then there's the rest of the Night's Dawn, and then you've got the Commonwealth Saga, then the continuation of that with the Void, and then the continuation of the Void in at the Abyss, Night Without Stars in the Abyss Beyond Dreams, and then there's the more recent Salvation trilogy, which I quite enjoyed, and then there's a Manhattan Reverse, which if I remember rightly is short stories, well, I'm not completely sure. And then on this shelf is a hodgepodge. So there's Nomon by Nick Harkaway. That was a recent replacement. So I used to have a paperback, but I've now replaced it with a nice hardcover, first edition. And then John Varley's, including the Unfortunately Ripped. So I tore that trying to take a sticker off it the other day, which was really annoying. And then there's some Silverberg hardbacks, mostly from the 80s. So there's the Majipur books, starting with well, Lord Valentine's Castle's the first one, but I don't have that in hardback. You can get it quite easily, but I didn't want to pay the £12 or £15 it would have costed. These are meant to be very good. I'm looking forward to reading those at some point. And then I'm trying to find Gregory Benford's in hardback when I can. And there's a rare breed, look, space. I've got space on my shelves. How about that? The bottom shelf on this bookcase, Subek, Semiosis, a couple of Christopher Priests, C.S. Friedman book, which and this one I'm really looking forward to. I've heard really good things about it. It's an author that's only recently crossed my path. It's actually my wife's copy of Ray Naylor's The Mountain in the Sea, beg your pardon. And then a bit more space, and then a few Terry Pratchett hardbacks, which I feel ambivalent about, and then a couple of Claire Norths. So that's that bookcase. Right. So the one right at the top here has got, I'm actually having to stand on tiptoes and I'm 6'4". Some David Eddings, and then a couple more Christopher Priests in paperback at the end there. Like, there's no reason for them to be on the same shelf at all. So the top boxes on these shelves are quite a lot taller than any books I'm likely to want to put on them, certainly paperback. So I kind of double up. So I've got a kind of bodged up extra shelf at the back there that I've made from just a bit of MDF, so I can double up. So that's a bit of room still on those shelves. I'm missing the first two of the Belgariad, which would fill that shelf up pretty nicely. And what have we got here? Some William Gibson's, and then a few odds and sods, including Death Arms, which has got a hunky beefcake with a gun on the front. And then on this shelf, what have we got? A couple of Jack Vance books that wouldn't fit where the others were, and then some Crichtons. I pick those up when I get them. I'm not particularly looking for them, but if they're there and they're in half decent condition, I grab them. And then what have we got there? Haldeman's Forever War trilogy, a couple of other Haldemans which I haven't read yet, and then The Dragons of Heorot, which is the sequel to The Legacy of Heorot, a book I really like. I've only read The Dragons once, I think. Okay, then there's more anthologies. So most of these were picked up in the sort of mega haul of anthologies I got the other week. I did already have this one, and I think maybe this one. The rest of them, and then a whole other bunch which are on the other shelves, I got recently. So I haven't read. I've read 2 or 3 of this one, number 1. Haven't read any of these. Let's see what have we got here. I think this is actually continuing the books that wouldn't fit. So I missed those. So that's the sort of end of the alphabet as far as the vintage books that wouldn't fit on the vintage shelves. And then another Paul Macaulay, which I'd like to read, although I think I gather that's the third book in a trilogy. And then there's the 2 Connie Willis books. I've enjoyed the first half, haven't read the second half yet. It's meant to be very good. Something I picked up in a charity shop. It's a kind of climate fiction type thing. All on its lonesome, a Harry Potter hardback that I got for £1 in a charity shop recently, which is, Order of the Phoenix. That's the 5th. Ideally, I'd like to get them all in that same format. So a few more Peter Hamiltons, which are next to the other Peter Hamilton shelf you already saw. So these are standalones, Great North Road, Fallen Dragon, and Misspent Youth. And then there is A Second Chance at Eden, which I think is a novella and 6 stories, it says. What have we got here? Couple of Charles Stross. I think that was the Singularity Sky was the first book he wrote. I think I'm pretty sure I've read those in the past, but I don't recall. And then Arcadia Martina, I really enjoyed these. She's got a. Is it her that's got a new? No, it's not her. I think she's got a new one on its way. It's not out yet. And then there's some Stephen King's. I'm not a rabid collector of Stephen King. I was a rabid reader of Stephen King many, many years ago. And if I see a Stephen King book in decent condition in hardback, whether it's science fiction tinged or not, then I'm going to grab it. So it's a good example. Unfortunately, it's not first. Well, it is a first edition, but it's not a first impression. Otherwise, that would be worth a few bob. And then you've got Werner Vinge at the end there, because they fitted on that shelf, not because they particularly belong next to Stephen King. I've read Fire Upon the Deep. I have not read A Deepness in the Sky, but I gather that's as good, if not better, than Fire Upon the Deep, so I should read that. What's on the bottom shelf? Mostly Richard Morgan, which I've read one of. I've read Altered Carbon. I've heard that Market Forces is excellent, as is Black Man, so I should read those at some point. There's poor old China Mieville here. I got the Iron Council book in a online book buying frenzy, so that's the third, I think, of a trilogy. So Perdido Street Station is the first, and there's another one, what's it called, Scar, which I don't have. Right, so that's the first of the 5 extra bookshelves. So what's at the top here? Some Stephen Baxter, some John Varley, bit of Greg Bear, and then a random assortment, a couple of Andy Weirs. I liked The Martian as soon as I read it. I thought it was great, and I've really enjoyed Project Hail Mary as well. We won't talk about Artemis quite as much, that wasn't as good. I'd love to get some more Octavia Butler. I've only read Kindred and I thought it was great, so I'll be looking out for those. And then I haven't read this. I've had this for a while. I think my wife bought it for me for Christmas a few years back, sort of as a joke, I think. But it's meant to be sort of a bit tongue-in-cheek. Dave Hutchison is a sort of underrated author. So these are 5 actually, are set in the same universe, let's call it. It's a sort of nearish future in a splintered Europe, and it follows a sort of group of, it's mainly set in Eastern Europe. So there's all of that shizzle going on, but also there's a parallel universe run by very tweedy Brits who've populated an unpopulated Europe with country squire types, and there's a way to get from one to the other, one universe to the other, which causes problems of all sorts. And then Ministry of the Future is the one I'd like to read pretty soon. Girl with All the Gifts I quite enjoyed. And then what have we got here? So there's Jumper, which is pretty trashy. It was made into an even trashier movie, but I quite like the book. Quite like the premise. I think this was her only science fiction novel, Cecilia Holland. She's more known for her fantasy, but that's meant to be good. China Mieville, the aforementioned. City in the City I really liked, actually. That's quite intriguing. There's 2 cities occupying the same territory, and they are sort of out of phase with each other, but it is possible, a bit like the Dave Hutchison's books, to pass from one to the other. I quite like that book. Perdido Street Station I've read, that's weird, but quite good. Desolation Road, that I bought off of Steve at Outlaw Bookseller. There is a sequel, Aries Express, which I recently got in paperback. I wouldn't mind getting that in hardback as well. C.J. Cherry's Cytine trilogy. I'd like to read it, but I haven't. And then on this shelf we've got some Anne Leckie. I quite enjoyed Raven Tower. It's more fantasy than science fiction, but it's about a world in which really mundane things can be gods with powers. Not necessarily spectacular powers, but you know, you might be a small rock and your power is that you can move. But it's a power, and you might not be able to exercise it very quickly, but it can be exercised. I quite enjoyed the concepts in that. And then there's the Yunhar Lee. I haven't read the short stories, actually. I'd quite like to read that. I have read the Nine Fox Gambit books. I quite like that. And then there's the Three Body Problem, which gets mixed reviews. I quite liked it, and it is pretty dry, not terribly entertaining, and the characters are a bit wooden, but the concepts in it, particularly in the second and maybe the third book, I quite enjoyed. And then there's some mainly Elizabeth Moons. So the only one of these that I've read is Remnant Population. I gather that the Vatta's War books are pretty good. I don't know about the Serrano books, but I liked her style of writing in that Remnant Population book. So I'll happily read some more of hers at some point. Then we've got the Ada Palmer sort of classics course masquerading as a science fiction series. I quite like this one because I was enjoying the novelty of it. The second one was really tedious, as was the third, although less so, and I really quite liked the fourth one. I think there was a sufficient payoff to be worth reading. And then there's the Charles Stross section. So this is the Merchant Prince's books. I've got 3 of the 6 that there are. I'd quite like to get those, all that full set. I wouldn't mind replacing these ones with these are the follow-on trilogy with hardback as well. I don't know how well executed they are as stories, but as books. But I quite like the premise, and I went with it. What have we got here? Fire and Blood, the George Martin sort of prequel, and my Alan Lee illustrated Lord of the Rings, bits and bobs. Silmarillion that I got for £2. It's a first edition, second impression, if I remember rightly. And then right at the bottom here we've got a couple of Neil Stephensons, both of which I've read several times, Seven Eves and Anathem, which is a really lovely book. A couple of Stephen Baxter, and a hardback of Provenance by Anne Leckie, which that's interesting. Have I still got the paperback on my shelves? Because if I have, I can get rid of that and make some room. Hurrah! Now I have the challenge of what to put in that hole, but I was sure I'll find something. Okay, where were we? Okay, top of the next one. So the next one is again pretty high up. So I've got all my pan lozenges. Actually, there's not all of them. So I've got another 4 or 5 which I haven't booked into my shelves yet. I haven't done the haul video for that, and I've got more on the way. I've had a bit of a splurge on Tinterweb. And above that is the Terry Pratchett books, the Discworld novels. And there's a few more here that are outsized that won't fit on that little shelf. And some Ben Bovers, Bend Over. And then some mix of more recent and slightly older books. So there's Megan O'Keefe's Velocity Weapon trilogy, the Protectorate trilogy, which I really liked. They're I mean, they're not awesome or anything, but they were definitely a sort of 3.5 out of 5 maybe. 5th season Broken Earth trilogy, I think it's called. I really love these. Such an interesting idea. A couple more of hers that I haven't read yet. And then you've got Dan Simmons, the 2 kind of Greek themed ones, Ilium and Olympus, the 2 Hyperion. I've got the Rise of Endymion in the Gonax Black, but I haven't got the sequel. I've got that in an American edition. There's a few mixed bag of Scott cards. Ender's Game probably would be in my top 10 books of all time if I wrote one, if I compiled one. That's a sort of intermediate book that's been slotted in. And then Speaker of the Dead, that I also really like. That might make a top 10 as well, actually. And then the others I haven't read. And there's a Murder Bot hiding in the corner there. It's the first one, All Systems Red. It's on this shelf. Two sets of Gormenghast, one complete and one not. I should really bin one. And then there's the Reynolds books that I don't have in hardback, that are in paperback. They live over here. I quite like these were really aimed at sort of young adult readers, but I quite enjoyed these books, basically pirates in space. But I like there's a sort of alien menace lurking at the back of it, which was quite nicely done, I thought. And then a few more Reynolds. Ian McDonald's Lunar Trilogy, which is fabulous. I rave about that quite a bit. And then the hardbacks of Aldous' Heliconia, and then a couple of Christopher Priests and Jack Vance. That's probably only over here because it fits and for no other reason. Right, let me move that. You could, while you're here, like this video, it'd be most helpful. What have we got? So Peter Watts' Firefall, so that's Blind Sight and Echopraxia. Of the two, I probably preferred Echopraxia, but as I was saying to somebody the other day, I should probably reread Blind Sight because it bamboozled me the first time. I quite enjoyed being bamboozled, but I'm not sure I got everything from it that I need to. The aforementioned Ares Express. That was quite good. It's a bit of a thriller rather than, I mean, it's loosely science fiction because it's based in a space station in orbit, but it's really a thriller. A few more Gregory Benfords. And then here's the Wyndham section. So I've got this kind of late 80s version, 3 of those. And then I've got a sort of late 70s, early 80s set, of which I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then there's the 70s Harry something or other covers. I can't remember who he is. Harry Wilcock, there we go. Of which I've got 3, 6, 7, and there are sort of 10 or 11 as a full set. And then there's some short stories and older books that have been sort of reissued under his name, that he originally published as John Bainan. And then 7 out of the 10 or 11 that are available of the more recently issued, it was around 2008, I think they were printed, that I got as a job lot on eBay for a couple of quid each, including postage. Oh. There must be an age that you reach where you kind of groan when you sit down and stand up again. I'll just move him out of the way. You could do that while you're here if you haven't already. There's the 5 Baxter Pratchett collab Long Earth books. I got those for £1 each in a charity shop. It's a good deal. I've read the first couple, maybe the third. I don't think I've read the last 2 certainly. Murakami, which I'm a bit intimidated by. Not sure if I'll enjoy those. I haven't read them yet. Claire North, End of the Day, which was really nice. I'm currently reading the first 15 Lives of Harry August, which I'm going to sail through because I'm already about a third through it, and I only started it last night. It's really good. A couple of George Martin's short story collections. Randomly, a couple of hardbacks, sort of Sidgwick and Jackson Silver, as they were known as. And then I'm not going out of my way to collect these, but when I see them in good nick, I pick them up. So I've got a few of the Witcher series. There's a whole bunch of them. Emma Newman's an author I really like. I'm not reading it, but it's on my TBR for this month, so it's not in its place. But there's a third one that goes here. Station 11, I really liked. I've read that a couple of times. And then we've got Ian Banks's. I've got a few of the non-science fiction. I went through a bit of a acquisitive phase, thinking I might as well, including Canal Dreams, which is not in that black and white format. As they get older, they're more expensive to get. Obviously, they're a bit rarer and a bit more collector value. I have most, but not all, of his science fiction books in hardback. The more recent ones are easier to get, of course. So I don't have Player of Games or Consider Phlebas, but I do have everything else, except, well, actually, this isn't so that's a trade paperback, not a hardback. It's not a culture novel, actually. So I think, with the exception of these two, I do have all the culture books in hardback, but I would like to get them. But you pay hundreds, if not thousands, for this one in hardback. Next shelf down is The Expanse, which I've only read through once. I should probably give it another crack. Or maybe I know it well enough now I can just dip in and out. I don't need to read all 9, but I probably should reread a few bits of it. I mean, it's is it the best writing in the world? No. Is it full of plot holes? Yes. But I really like the characters, and I like the found family aspect of it. That's really cool. And then there's a bit of Kim Stanley Robinson action down here. There's more on another shelf. I don't know why they're not together. And then there's the Eugene Philip Neil Stevenson Baroque cycle plus Cryptonomicon, which I think I've read, but not for a long time. There's a few more Stephen Baxter's in a hardback, and then there's a few Asimov hardbacks. So these are the Hugo winner
anthologies. I think there's at least one more, possibly two, that I need to get for the full set. And then there's 2 out of the 3 Galactic Empire books which were reissued in the 80s. So I'd like to get, there's another one, I forget what it's called, I'd like to get. And some other bits and bobs. Sort of random sort of magpie stuff when I see it in a charity shop, I generally speaking can't resist. I'm quite intrigued by this Charles Sheffield, the Ganymede Club. It looks interesting. Right, we're on the last bookcase now.
So on top of this one, it doesn't have a top box because the ceiling slopes over here, so it wouldn't fit. But I've got them. The rest of the Mammoth Book of Best New SF books are missing. The ones between about 9 or 8 and 15. So there's a bunch missing. I don't have 16 either. But otherwise, and there's a couple after 29, if I remember rightly, 30 and 31 that I don't have. And then we're sort of a bit of a fantasy shelf. Where were we? So a bit of fantasy. The Disappointing Stormlight Archive. I liked the first book. That's these two together. This one was okay. And then I started to get really bogged down and I gave up 2/3 of the way through this one. So I probably won't buy any more. And then you've got Game of Thrones. Very good. We wait with bated breath for the next book, book 6. And there's a few Gollancz Yellow Jackets, a couple of Cowpers, both ex-library books, both a bit tatty. And then one I found, I think in a charity shop, Michael Bishop. Oh, there goes my light. Apologies, that's the battery running out on my light. All right, let's try that. Strigazzi Brothers. I've read Roadside Picnic, but none of the others. And then we get into Philip K. Dick Land. He's got a section of his own. Arguably should be over with the vintage ones, but he warrants one of his own. I think a few hardbacks that I found in a charity shop. And then a couple of the SF Masterworks in the yellow. And then a variety of different paperbacks. A bit more fancy on this shelf. So there's the Tad Williams follow-up to the Dragonbone Chair, etc. Memory, Sorrow and Thorn. I haven't read the third one actually. I've forgotten about that, but I quite like them, so I must finish that. And then there's a couple more. The first 2 Otherland books, volumes 1 and 2. I don't have the others. I've never read them. And then there's the Donaldson, Ujima Flip, Thomas Covenant books. I haven't read for a long time, but really enjoyed when I read them in the 80s. And then there's the Julian May Saga of the Exiles. Haven't read that. Passed me by in the 80s when it came out. And then there's Raymond E. Feist original, the OG trilogy, Magician, Silverthorn and Darkness at Sethanon. And then what do we have? Okay, a bit of Dune related action. So the Dune books are separate from the other Herberts. A couple of movie tie-in versions of Dune, the new movie and the older movie from the 80s, the David Lynch one. The blue format 80s, I forget his name now, who the artist is there. Can't remember. Begins with G, I think. Jerry something, or Guy, or something like that. And then Bruce Pennington's, I've got 4 of those. So I think that's all there is, the 4. So Dune, Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, and God Emperor. In that, I'm missing a couple of the blue ones, including Dune in the blue. I would like to get that as well. And then some odds and sods. That Scott Westerfield book was interesting, actually. There is an Empire. I haven't read that for a long time. And there's a few Ken MacLeods at the end there, various stripes. Stephen Donaldson's Gap Cycle, and then Mordaunt's Need, which I really enjoyed. I don't know what those 2 are doing up there. There is shelf space for them, so they could go on a shelf. Chapter House Dune I found in a charity shop. Wouldn't mind the full set of hardbacks, but that's pushing it a bit, I think. Tchaikovsky's more recent trilogy. I forget what it's called now. I enjoyed the first 2, didn't enjoy the last one so much. There's another Tchaikovsky, Doors of Eden, that's a Singleton, I think. And then some Ken MacLeod's in hardback. I've read Star Fraction and Stone Canal, haven't read the others, but I like them so much I replaced my paperbacks with hardbacks and got a few more while I was at it. And then there's a Neil Asher bumper set. I got all of these, bar 1 and 2 that I already had, in one bumper charity shop haul where someone had dropped their entire collection. So a bunch of hardbacks and some paperbacks. I've read a couple. I've read the first one, Grid Linked, and I've read the second one, I forget what it's called, and then I've read Brass Man, I think, which is the third one, if I remember rightly. And I think I've read The Voyage of the Sable Keech, I think. I can't remember. I quite like it. I got a bit bogged. I tried to read one of the more recent ones and got a bit bogged down in it. So Dark Tower lives here. My original 3 from the 80s and 90s. And then I'm gradually in reverse order replacing the paperbacks with hardbacks. I don't have Wizard and Glass, which is, well, I do have it in paperback but not in hardback. Wizard and Glass there, I'd like to get that. Where have we got? Okay, so Stephen Baxter's Zealey sequence. I'm missing Raft. That's the first book. You pay big bucks for that in hardback unless you find it luckily in the charity shop. So these 3 I found: Flux, Ring and Time Lock Infinity. I think I paid £2.49 for each. They're in great condition. That Empire of Fear book is a vampire tale. It's a vampire aristocracy. It's a Brian Stableford branching out. A couple of Le Guins, a couple of Clark collaborations, and then there's the Kim Stanley Robinson Mars trilogy, a German science fiction book which is translated into English, and then there's the Queen of the Tearling, which again YA books, bit fantasy, but I really enjoyed them actually. It was certainly the first one I really liked. The others maybe less so, but the first one was really good. I thought a bit refreshing. So that's it. That's all the shelves. Right. Hi again. So that's it. That was the library tour. Hopefully you enjoyed that. If there's anything that I fled past that you want to ask me about, then do. Otherwise, until the next time, bye for now.